I do not walk into a conversation blind. I do not speak to win affection. I speak to reveal patterns. Every man I meet is terrain. Some are smooth, inviting, easy to traverse until the mudslides begin. Others are jagged, defensive, guarded by sharp edges and weather-worn walls. But if you climb carefully, they reveal the highest vantage points. You were taught to read books, but never taught to read people. You were trained to scan data, not to decode the battlefield of intention behind another man's words. You chase goals while misreading the humans standing between you and those goals. That is how most battles are lost. You prepare your plans, but forget the emotional topography of the opponent. You memorize the script, but forget that the terrain shifts when someone feels threatened, proud, overlooked, or disrespected. You bring logic into a storm of emotion and wonder why your army drowns. This is why I do not simply study people. I map them. I map their values, because values are altitude. They show what a person will rise for and what they'll sink beneath. I map their history, because past wounds shape present reactions. And I map their silence, for it is the quiet corners of someone's soul that reveal what they're truly defending. There is no manipulation in this, only mastery. A general does not hate the mountain for being high or the valley for being low. He adapts his route, his load, his speed. Likewise, I do not judge a man for being emotional, calculated, broken, or proud. I simply adjust how I advance, where I place my words, and when I hold my silence. Because most people are not strategic. They are reactive. They mistake comfort for peace. They mistake agreement for trust. But peace is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of understanding. And trust is not given when you agree with someone. Trust is given when they know you see them fully and still choose to walk with them. So I make it my discipline to observe longer than I speak. When a man speaks of his enemies, I watch what names make his jaw tighten. When a woman recalls her past, I listen not for the facts, but for the frequency. Which stories she returns to, which memories she coats with pride or regret. Every person has terrain, and terrain has patterns. Some flood under pressure, others harden. Some disintegrate when praised too early. Others rise when doubted. You must learn the soil of each person, what nourishes them, what poisons them, and what buries them alive. This is why charm is not strategy. To charm is to skate on the surface. To strategize is to walk barefoot through their terrain and feel where it burns, where it softens, and where it breaks. And so I ask you, do you truly know the people around you, or are you simply projecting what you want them to be? Because strategy begins not with ambition, but with awareness. Not of yourself alone, but of the minds, fears, habits, and histories of the people your success depends on. You want to lead? Then stop asking what they want. Ask what they fear losing. You want loyalty? Then stop promising gain. Prove you understand their scars. You want to win? Then stop looking ahead. Start seeing who is standing beside you and how far they're truly willing to walk. In war, terrain tells you where to station your forces. In life, people are the terrain. Some will help you rise, some will make you sink, and some are just fog, unclear, dangerous, beautiful, but deadly when you rush in without a plan. The path forward is not through force, but through understanding. A general who studies terrain wins ground. A man who studies people wins time, trust, and unseen allies. The map is not in your hand. It's in their face, their pauses, their contradictions. Read it before you march. In every conversation, you are either uncovering terrain or wandering through it blindfolded. I do not ask questions to gather information. I ask to expose leverage. to reveal what a person guards most closely, because what a man protects without being asked tells you more than any answer he gives. Observe carefully. When you touch a person's pride, how fast do they stiffen? When you touch their doubt, do they shrink or attack? These are not reactions, they are boundaries, terrain lines. And every strategist must know the lines they dare not cross, and the lines they can draw others across. I once sat with a rival general whose armies outnumbered mine 3-1. He offered peace. I declined, not because I sought war, but because I studied him. His words were tranquil, but his fingers twitched each time my eyes met his. He said, "Let's settle this diplomatically." But his tone cracked at the word diplomatically. That was his false ground. He used language as a fog. But I listened to the shifts, not the script. And in those shifts, I found where his terrain was eroding. His troops were strong, his confidence was not. And so I bled his patience with silence. I eroded his will with stillness. By the time the first arrow flew, he had already surrendered, not to my sword, but to my understanding of him. You do not need armies to win. You need to understand the ground beneath every soul, and that begins by slowing down your instinct to label. Most men want to sort people. This one is dangerous, that one is weak, this one is useful. But humans are not categories. They are climates, ever-shifting, layered, and affected by conditions unseen. The man you call cold may have buried his warmth in layers of loss. The woman you think soft may have survived more storms than you'll ever face. And the ally you take for granted may be calculating your weakness in silence. So I listen not just to what people say, but how they carry silence. Some use silence as a weapon, to control the tempo, to make you squirm, to mask ignorance. Others fill every silence with noise, afraid their thoughts might betray them. But the rare ones, the disciplined ones, sit in silence not to escape the conversation, but to hear it more deeply. Those are the ones I study most, because true power is not loud, it is observant. When I enter a room, I am not first to speak. I measure presence before I measure posture. I watch who others look to when uncertain. I note who interrupts and who recalibrates. I observe who disguises their need for control with smiles and who hides insecurity behind aggression. These are all terrain features, the emotional hills and valleys that dictate how people move under pressure. And when I map them, I do not judge. You cannot win terrain by criticizing its shape. You must navigate it, adapt to it, exploit it when necessary, but never underestimate it. Because what you underestimate will one day become your ambush. I once misread a young lieutenant. Quiet, forgettable, always standing just outside the circle. I assumed he was inconsequential, but he had mapped me. He studied every command I gave, every word I didn't speak, every pattern in my movements. And when a breach occurred in our southern flank, he was the only one who predicted it. Not because he had more knowledge, but because he had more stillness, more patience, more discipline in observation than I did. That day, I learned a lesson no map had ever taught me. The best terrain readers are not always those in power. They are those who watch power without trying to grasp it. So ask yourself, do you study people to understand or to control? Do you observe so you can dominate or so you can align? Because strategy is not about puppeteering humans like pieces on a board. Strategy is about alignment, choosing when to lead, when to follow, and when to walk away from terrain that cannot be conquered without self-destruction. People are not meant to be conquered. They are meant to be understood, leveraged, or avoided. Every person you meet is a landscape of stories, regrets, hopes, and defenses. And if you treat them like an obstacle or a trophy, they will resist you at their roots. But if you read them like terrain, with patience, precision, and humility, they will reveal their passages, their strongholds, their ambushes. And you will walk through with more than victory. You will walk through awake, because the greatest victory is not defeating others. It is moving through their world without losing your own shape. To truly know people like you know terrain, you must erase your craving for fast conclusions. Your mind is wired to decide quickly, friend or foe, smart or foolish, strong or weak. But in war, the terrain that appears simple often hides the deadliest traps. And in life, the people who seem easy to understand are often the ones whose depth could drown you if you stepped in without caution. You see, every person is layered like terrain under fog. Their surface may show confidence, but underneath lies a fractured belief system. Their tone may sound compliant, but beneath it sits a simmering resentment. You will never see these truths if you only analyze what they say. You must watch what they repeat, and more importantly, what they avoid. People betray their deepest patterns not in answers, but in avoidance. They steer away from certain topics, like a traveler avoiding a known minefield. They flinch at compliments that strike too close to a lie they tell themselves. They change the subject when the question touches their shame. And this is sacred ground to a strategist. Not to exploit, but to understand. Because just like terrain that looks solid until the rain comes, people look composed until pressure rises. And your success in business, leadership, even love, depends on whether you've mapped the fault lines before they crack beneath your feet. This is why I listen more than I speak, because the wind tells me more about the mountain than the mountain itself. The way someone reacts to stress tells me more than how they act when calm. Their anger shows me where they feel powerless. Their defensiveness shows me what part of their identity is still wounded. If you pay close enough attention, people tell you exactly where to step and where not to. But most do not pay attention. Most speak too soon. They treat people like a paved road instead of wild terrain, so they fall into emotional ravines. They make deals with men whose loyalty was only surface deep. They trust smiles that hide disloyalty, and they mistake silence for agreement. They lose not because they lacked strength, but because they misread the field. Do not be like them. Approach every human with the discipline of a scout. Probe lightly. Observe long. Resist the urge to judge quickly. Delay the gratification of being right about someone, because it is in that delay that true patterns emerge. The pattern is everything. When a man grows quiet every time accountability enters the room, that is terrain. When a colleague only praises you in public but undercuts you in private, that is terrain. When a friend reacts with jealousy masked as sarcasm whenever you win, terrain. And yet, knowing terrain is not enough. You must also know yourself as terrain. What makes you impulsive? What compliments blind you to danger? What kind of praise causes you to drop your guard? Because if you don't map your own terrain first, you will keep crashing into others, blaming them for the damage your unawareness caused. The general who wins a war does not only study the land before him, he studies how his army moves through it. He tests the weight of their load. He adapts the formation. He anticipates exhaustion and prepares water before thirst becomes a threat. So too must you prepare for the people you meet. Anticipate their needs, know their triggers, predict their doubts. Not to manipulate, but to move wisely. Because when you understand people, you don't need to overpower them. You don't need to convince them with noise. You just move like water, bending when necessary, cutting when needed, but always flowing forward with clarity. This is the path of the strategist. It is slower than charm. It is less exciting than bravado. but it is the only path that leads to sustainable power. Because those who study terrain build roots others cannot even see, and those who study people build alliances, avoid traps, and create victories that outlast the moment. So I say again, know people like you know terrain. Not to own them, not to win them, but to move through their world without losing your footing, and without turning every interaction into a battlefield. To do that, you must train your eye, sharpen your patience, and learn to walk slowly through the hearts and histories of those who walk beside you. For in the end, the most dangerous terrain is the one you didn't know you were standing on. Every conflict you enter begins long before the first word is spoken. The outcome is shaped not by your argument, but by your awareness. You can possess the sharpest strategy, the most refined language, and yet if you misread the person before you, if you misunderstand their emotional terrain, you will find yourself cornered, outflanked, or ambushed by their silence, their pride, or their pain. This is why the ancient generals didn't just study enemies. They studied humans, their fears, their loyalties, their need to be seen. Because no terrain is fixed. It shifts beneath time, pressure, and memory. So do people. The man who is gentle today may erupt tomorrow, not because he is unstable, but because you failed to notice the erosion, the slow drip of stress, humiliation, and invisible wounds. The woman who complies today may rebel tomorrow because your commands built up silently in her, like a dam waiting to burst. A strategist watches for the shifts before they become cracks. I do not speak until I've measured the mood, not just the words, the temperature, the subtle tension behind someone's posture, the glance they send across the room, the moment their hands tremble, not with fear, but with restraint. Most people are not at war with you. They are at war with themselves. But if you step in unaware, you become the target they've been waiting to release it upon. So I begin every negotiation, every meeting, every alliance-building moment, not with an agenda, but with a map. A map of who this person is beneath the surface. What past have they not healed from? What outcome are they secretly afraid of? What truth are they pretending not to know? You must learn to see around people's words, not just through them, because every terrain has shadows, and every person has one too. Some people weaponize their competence to hide their insecurity. Others use vulnerability to disarm you, then strike. Some pretend to follow, waiting for you to misstep so they can take the lead. These patterns are not malicious. They are human. But unless you observe them, unless you slow your approach and read the terrain fully, you will be outmaneuvered before you know the game has started. So I watch for rhythms. Does someone change their tone when a superior enters the room? Do they only become enthusiastic when speaking of their own victories? Do they lose eye contact when asked about responsibility? Each detail is a footprint in the terrain, a footprint that tells me where they've been and where they're trying not to go. The skilled general does not march across unfamiliar land with arrogance. He sends scouts. He studies the trees, the winds, the silence. Do the birds fly away as he approaches? Do the leaves fall too soon? Is the soil too soft, hiding something beneath? You must study people the same way. The moment someone agrees too quickly, pause. The moment someone laughs at something unfunny, pause. The moment they mirror your opinions too perfectly, pause. Because that is not harmony. That is concealment. True alignment is not built on charm. It's built on earned trust. And trust is not something you request. It's something you uncover. You uncover it by entering the terrain with respect, not conquest. You leave your weapons at the gate and bring instead your awareness, your questions, and your silence. Most of all, your patience. The terrain of another person is not a battlefield to storm. It is a territory to understand. And just like terrain, people resist invasion but welcome presence. Be present. Be still. Be watchful. They will show you their soft ground, their hard edges, their caves, their rivers, their cliffs, not through explanation, but through habit. And if you stay long enough, if you observe without interrupting, you will learn how to walk through even the most guarded soul without setting off a single trap. Because it is not force that gets you through difficult people. It is familiarity with the terrain. And once you are familiar, even the hardest person becomes readable. They stop being the storm and start becoming the map. You must learn to enter people slowly, the same way a seasoned general approaches unfamiliar land, not with speed, but with sensing, not with dominance, but with direction. Because to know people like you know, terrain is not about control. It is about predictive movement. It is the ability to sense when someone is about to retreat emotionally before they physically turn away. It's the discipline to feel the heat in a rising argument and steer it to lower ground before a wildfire erupts. You cannot do this if you are too eager to speak. You cannot do this if your ego interrupts your perception. You must become like water, observant, adaptive, unassuming. Water does not argue with stone. It simply finds the cracks. Over time, it breaks mountains, not through strength, but through patience and understanding of structure. Apply this to people. The person who rejects your idea harshly may not hate the idea. They may hate being unseen. The partner who resists your help may not be stubborn. They may be tired of feeling rescued. The teammate who never speaks up may not be disengaged. They may be waiting for you to notice them before they trust you. All of these are emotional topographies. To move through them with strength, you must know where to step and when to wait. This is why I don't just listen to words. I listen to defense mechanisms. And you should too. Because when someone says, "I'm fine," but their shoulders harden, that's not peace. That's a ridge being built. When someone says, "It doesn't matter," and yet their voice cracks, that's not detachment. That's terrain collapsing under its own weight. People are not puzzles. They are landscapes, and landscapes do not speak in words. They speak in patterns. Patterns of behavior, patterns of protection, patterns of silence. And only a fool mistakes a calm field for a safe one, because some of the deadliest battlefields begin in stillness. So I train myself to notice more than most. When someone glances sideways after you compliment them, they may not believe your words. When someone over-explains a simple point, they may be hiding uncertainty under control. When someone raises their voice, it's often because they've already lost control of something inside them. Knowing terrain means knowing pressure points. Knowing people means knowing emotional pressure points. But understand, this knowledge is not for exploitation. It's for navigation. I do not use a map to destroy the land. I use it to move through the land without losing my way. And in relationships, personal, professional, or political, you will lose your way often if you are not mapping the people beside you. This is why most plans fail. Not because they were weak, but because they were built on misread terrain. A misread team, a misread client, a misread audience, a misread friend. So make it your habit to observe before reacting, to wait before labeling, to walk beside someone long enough to see who they are when they believe they are unseen. Because a man's true terrain appears only when he thinks no one is watching. And once you see it, you must adjust your route. Do not force your path through their cliffs. Do not demand rivers to run dry just for your passage. Find the bridge. Find the rhythm. Move with intelligence, not impatience. Because impatience is the enemy of clarity, and clarity is your only true weapon. The one who sees the full terrain, not just the peaks, but the pitfalls, will always move with an advantage others cannot even name. This is how empires are built without noise. This is how influence spreads without resistance. This is how power moves without leaving scars. Know people like you know terrain, because the deeper you understand others, the less you need to resist them. And the less you resist, the more you flow. And the more you flow, the more doors open that once seemed sealed. Victory, then, is not in dominance. It is in discernment. Discernment is not a trait. It is a discipline. It is forged by the repetition of restraint, of holding your tongue when judgment rises, of pausing when your mind rushes to conclusions, of stepping back when your instinct is to push forward. A man who rushes to act before understanding terrain becomes his own obstacle. So it is with people. If you speak before listening deeply, you walk into traps built by your own assumptions. If you correct before observing patterns, you offend what you never took the time to respect. And if you seek influence without understanding, you will win noise but lose ground. I do not chase influence. I earn access to hearts, to trust, to unspoken truths. You cannot buy that. You cannot demand it. You must deserve it by seeing what others ignore and honoring what others dismiss. This is why I speak little in rooms filled with pride. I listen longer in places where pain is unspoken. I study faces more than I study titles. Because rank does not reveal terrain, repetition does. Watch a man across time, and he will reveal his true shape. Watch how he reacts under pressure, and he will show you his real hierarchy of values. Watch who he becomes when power is within reach, and you will see whether he commands or consumes. And the same is true for you. You must map yourself, not only to understand others, but to move through them with integrity. Because the terrain of others will test you. It will tempt you to manipulate. It will invite you to dominate. It will dare you to shortcut your strategy by exploiting what you've learned. But that is not strategy. That is survivalism. And survivalism wins battles, but loses wars. If you exploit terrain without respecting it, the land itself will reject you. Just as people do when they realize you saw them only as tools, not as territory with meaning. You will find yourself surrounded, even when no one has drawn their sword. You will wonder why trust fades, why loyalty thins, why once open paths are now blocked. It's because you treated people as terrain to conquer, rather than terrain to navigate. This is why I train leaders not just to speak better, but to listen more sharply. Because every person is a map, but only those with trained eyes can read it. You will not read it by asking surface questions. You will read it by watching what they repeat, what they delay, what they hide in plain sight. Pay attention to the moments people go silent. Pay attention to where their language grows vague. Pay attention to what makes their voice drop or rise. These are altitude shifts in emotional terrain. They show you where the cliffs are, where the pressure builds, where the landslides wait. And your job, as a strategist, a leader, a partner, a builder, is not to detonate those cliffs for effect. It is to build the bridge around them, to choose your path with foresight, not force. Because force moves people, yes, but only understanding moves them willingly. And that is the greatest kind of movement. The kind where you no longer need to push. You no longer need to sell. You simply step, and others walk with you, not because they must, but because they trust that you see them. That is earned terrain, and it cannot be stolen, faked, or imitated. It can only be gained by the slow, strategic discipline of emotional reconnaissance. So train your mind like a scout, sharpen your ears like a spy, and above all, walk like a cartographer of the human condition. Because when you truly know people like you know terrain, you'll never be lost in any room again. There is a difference between presence and pressure. Most people enter a room with pressure. Their energy insists. Their opinion demands. Their voice fills every corner as if to announce, "I am here, therefore I matter. But terrain does not respond to pressure. It responds to presence. The mountain does not move because you shout at it. The river does not calm because you command it. Likewise, people do not open because you demand them to. They open slowly, when your presence feels safe, steady, and observant. Presence is quiet strength. It's in the way you sit when others squirm, the way you observe without interrupting, the way your eyes follow patterns rather than faces. In war, the presence of a commander should calm his men and unsettle his enemies. In life, your presence should do the same, comfort the loyal and expose the unstable. But that kind of presence only comes from knowing terrain. You are not calm because you are passive. You are calm because you've already studied the slope ahead. You know which words to avoid, which emotions to sidestep, where to plant your strategy so it grows instead of sinks. This is why I walk into conflict like I walk into a canyon, carefully, aware of echoes, alert for loose stone, and always knowing the way out before I go too deep. People, like canyons, echo back what you bring into them. Bring fear, and you'll hear it return tenfold. Bring stillness, and even their chaos will begin to mirror your control. But that only works if your stillness is earned, not performed. Fake stillness is theatrical. It is the appearance of control while the mind panics inside. True stillness is strategic. It is rooted in reconnaissance. You are still because you've already walked the map in your mind. So few people do this. They walk into meetings unprepared for the emotional terrain. They pitch ideas to clients without understanding their silent agendas. They date, partner, befriend, without listening to the landscape of the other person's fears. And then they wonder why things fall apart, why trust breaks, why loyalty evaporates. It's because they never walked the ground before they built upon it. You do not build fortresses on swamps. You do not forge alliances on unscouted land. And you do not lead people you have not yet understood. But if you do understand, deeply, quietly, without rush or ego, then you hold the rarest form of power, predictive empathy. You see the turn before it arrives. You sense the fracture before it cracks. You speak what others needed but didn't know how to ask for. And in that moment, you stop being a leader by title. You become a leader by gravitational pull. People follow not because you say so, but because you move through them like a master of terrain, careful, clear, calibrated. This is why your study of people must be constant. You must update your maps. What once was solid ground may now be shaky. A person you trusted last year may be fractured today. Their terrain has shifted, and if you do not adjust, your step will be misaligned. Just as generals rescout terrain before a new battle, so must you reobserve even familiar people when the stakes rise. Because complacency in terrain is how empires fall. The general who assumes the path is still clear finds his army lost in a canyon. The leader who assumes his ally is still loyal finds himself flanked from within. You must stay awake, stay aware, stay willing to remap, because the terrain of people is never still, and you must be the one who moves with it, not behind it. Most people live unaware that they themselves are terrain to others. They walk through life fixated on reading others, yet fail to see how others are reading them. And worse, they leave their terrain unguarded. Their expressions betray their anxiety. Their habits reveal their weakness. Their tone exposes their need for approval. A strategist does not just read terrain, he shapes his own. He knows his face is a map, his words, elevation, his silence, shadow, so he controls what to reveal and when, not to deceive, but to direct. Because when others step onto your terrain, they will try to define you. They will project, assume, push. And if you are unaware of your own landscape, You will be led by their misinterpretation. But if you master your terrain, your tone, your presence, your timing, then even the most aggressive personality will slow their approach. They will tread more carefully, and in doing so, they will reveal more of their terrain than they intended. This is not about performance. It is about alignment. When your internal terrain matches your external one, when your values, your presence, your words, your silences all follow the same elevation, you become unreadable by amateurs and magnetic to the wise. You are no longer terrain to be walked upon. You are terrain that shapes the journey of others. This is how commanders rise without shouting, how strategists influence without persuading, how leaders gain followers without ever issuing commands. It is through topographical integrity. So while you study the terrain of others, never neglect the work of shaping your own. Ask yourself, what do people feel when they step into your presence? Do you invite clarity or confusion? Do your words build trust or obligation? Are your silences felt as pressure or peace? You may think these things are subtle, but subtlety is where terrain lives. A slight rise, a soft slope, a change in air pressure, all unnoticed by the untrained, but decisive to the one who scouts deeply. And the battlefield of life is won in the subtle, in knowing when to pause during a negotiation, just long enough to let silence provoke revelation, in knowing when to ask a question that seems harmless, but lands in a place they didn't expect to reveal, in sensing when a room's energy shifts, not through words, but through breath, posture, gaze. These are the contours of mastery. And to walk as a master, you must move with terrain in mind at all times. So many fail because they move with only their agenda. They charge ahead, they broadcast, they push. But life does not reward force without awareness. The greatest victories are not seized. They are aligned into, through hundreds of micro-adjustments made by someone who studies terrain like a religion. Because once you understand people like you understand terrain, you avoid battles you don't need. You win allies before you ask. You step forward knowing where the ground is solid and where it's about to break. This is not magic. This is not luck. This is strategy of the highest form. The art of walking through the complexity of human nature with so much clarity, patience, and respect that even the storm yields to your step. There is a moment in every engagement when the other person realizes they are being understood more deeply than they expected. It is subtle, a hesitation in their words, a pause in their breath, a softening of their resistance. In that moment, they stop trying to manage your perception of them. They stop defending their image. They stop performing. Because they sense that you see not just what they do, but why they do it. And that is when terrain opens. Not through interrogation, not through confrontation, but through clarity paired with compassion. I've sat across the table from enemies who wielded power like a club, men who had ruled through intimidation, who had never been challenged without force. And I didn't challenge them with opposition. I challenged them with understanding. I said nothing offensive. I made no threats. I simply named the fear behind their posture. I reflected their hidden motivations, gently, but with precision. And in that moment, they could no longer bluff, no longer posture, no longer escape the map I had drawn of their emotional terrain. They didn't surrender their position, they surrendered their performance. Because when a man realizes he has been fully seen, he only has two choices: fight to preserve the illusion, or relax into the truth. Most people choose the second, not because they are weak, but because they are tired of pretending. And if you can be the presence that allows them to let go of that performance, even briefly, you gain influence that cannot be purchased, coerced, or replicated. This is the power of knowing terrain. You don't overpower people. you render their defenses obsolete. Because once you see the layout of someone's fears, habits, desires, and boundaries, you don't need to push. You can move through them like wind moves through the forest, adjusting course without losing direction. But to do this, you must abandon two things: the desire to be right, the hunger to be impressive. Those two motives distort perception. They make you read people not as they are, but as threats to your ego or validations of your worth. The strategist, the true one, enters every interaction with this mindset. Let me understand before I move, because premature movement is the root of most miscalculations. And miscalculations, when they involve people, cost more than pride. They cost possibility. They close doors. They fracture alliances. They plant seeds of mistrust that grow into forests of separation. So hold your movement. Withhold your assumption. Let the other person reveal themselves on their own time. They always will, because humans, like terrain, cannot help but be what they are. You don't need to force the mountain to show its slope. You don't need to pressure the valley to reveal its depth. You just need to stand still long enough. Still enough to feel where the wind gathers. Still enough to sense where the pressure rises. Still enough to notice what others are too distracted to see. Stillness is not inactivity. It is data collection. It is emotional cartography in motion. And once you are fluent in the language of terrain, of voice tone, breath length, gaze aversion, tension patterns, linguistic deflection, and recurring metaphors, you become fluent in people. And people, not plans, are the real terrain you move through every day. Know them, map them, respect them, and you will go further than armies, faster than speeches, deeper than titles, because influence is not about rising above people. It is about moving through them with mastery. At the highest level, strategy is no longer about defeating others. It is about disappearing inside their terrain. Not to be unseen, but to be so attuned that your presence causes no friction. So fluid that you do not set off alarms. So precise that every word lands in fertile ground, not on stony resistance. This is the art of internal maneuvering. Because the battlefield is no longer physical, it is psychological, emotional, invisible, and only those who've mastered the unseen layers of terrain can win without battle. This is why I study not only people, but the conditions surrounding them. Because terrain is never static. It changes with season, with pressure, with time. A man who is calm when praised may become hostile when questioned. A loyal friend may grow distant when your rise reflects their stagnation. A reliable ally may pivot when the winds of power shift direction. You cannot know terrain by snapshot. You must study it across time, temperature, and tension. Ask, how does this person shift under pressure? Who do they become when no one is watching? What do they worship in silence, and what do they betray in fear? These are the hills and valleys you must learn to walk. And in doing so, you will begin to speak with a different kind of voice, one shaped by resonance, not volume. Because once you understand the terrain of someone's soul, you no longer guess. You no longer plead. You no longer strategize out of desperation. You move with intention. You say just enough to stir reflection. You pause just long enough to create space. You look just deep enough to break down the surface-level games. And suddenly, others feel known, not exposed. They feel seen, not invaded. They feel guided, not controlled. This is the highest form of power, quiet alignment through deep terrain mapping. And when you operate at this level, you will find that your world changes. Conflict decreases. Trust increases. Loyalty deepens. And your influence expands, not through effort, but through presence calibrated by precision. But this path is not for the impatient. It requires you to let go of fast wins, shallow praise, and temporary alignment. It asks you to become a lifetime student of the unseen, not just of people, but of yourself. Because you too are terrain, and the strategist who knows others but not himself is like a scout who maps every land but trips over his own roots. So study your responses, map your biases, observe your blind spots, because the more clearly you see your own terrain, the more clearly you'll move through the terrain of others without causing landslides. And in the end, what is strategy if not the art of moving without damage, of building without noise, of winning without leaving blood in the soil? That is what I seek. That is what I practice. That is what I pass on to you. So let others shout their way into power. Let them bulldoze their way through resistance. Let them confuse control with mastery. You will study. You will observe. You will move through people like a shadow moves across the land, never forced, never blocked, but always present, always shaping, always aware. Because you no longer guess. You no longer chase. You know people, like you know terrain. And that is how you win, not once, not loudly, but again and again, quietly, forever.